The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff.
From rap music to political leadership to the role of the Black church, join us for a survey of the state of Black America. Our guest today is Ron Walters, professor of government and politics at the University of Maryland, and author of Freedom is Not Enough: Black Voters, Black Candidates, and American Presidential Politics. And now, Doug Besheroff.
Ron Walters, welcome back to Policy Watch.
Thank you very much.
It's a delight to have a colleague from the University of Maryland on our program. We talked about politics the last time you were on your show, I'd like to talk a little bit about culture. I'd like to talk about the American popular culture as well as the Black culture. Jazz, which we think of as American, right, is African American and American. But we have had a controversy in our country about rap culture. So first, you educated me about that a little bit. You said 70% of the commerce in this rap culture is funded by young white males. Talk a little bit about that.
That's right. One of the reasons why we can't separate the cultures out is because so much of African American culture, as you pointed out, today rap culture is really the leading edge of American popular culture in many ways. And the commerce behind it is really very powerful. The sales and CDs and clothing and the stylistic features of this movement really have been appropriated by young whites. And so that figure of 70% in some ways is generous, is not too generous. I think that what we have here really is an issue of what is appropriate, though, in the culture. Because at the same time, it has emerged from a community which has given to that popular culture certain cultural cues that are troubling and have been politicized. So despite the tremendous economic power behind it, there are people beginning to rebel against that aspect of it. So in the Black community, one of the persons that rebelled very early on was C. Dolores Tucker. Mm-hmm. The former Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, tremendous African-American woman, now deceased, started to talk about the values of women and the negative portrayal of women in rap culture, and made common cause with
Bill Bennett
in that respect. It's come a long way to the point where today Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton are leading a campaign to stop the use of the N-word. They have just had the buy-in of Russell Simmons. So he has now recommended that no longer would the N-word or negative references to women, the B-word, the H-word, be used in this music. So this campaign in the Black community has been going on for some time. The major media has not picked it up. So the question is, well, what is Black leadership doing?
Right. And so when we think about, for example, the Don Imus controversy, I'm tempted to say, judging from what you just said, so you have the rap culture, which is also a leading American culture. You have young whites in it. You have a Don Imus whose audience, I'm sure, is substantially white as well as any other racial group. So he's caught up in this. He's using these words, whatever he was thinking, I don't know, but he's using them because he's caught up in this place where you don't want to be, especially if you're a white man. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. I think, actually, I'm of two minds about that, because on the one hand, he's using some of these terms that have been legitimized through popular culture. That really has evoked a lot of storm because he used the wrong examples in order to characterize as young Black women on the Rutgers basketball team who had done such a marvelous job and who were so innocent, to characterize them using these ugly words.
There doesn't seem to be have been any reason for doing that except to be outrageous.
That's right, and that's a flip side of where one has to go, because the shock jocks and conservative radio, in a way, have appropriated a lot of these terms, and they're speaking to an audience really that has been part of the emergence of a conservative culture in this country, and to the extent that they have a tremendous role in talk radio. This kind of language not only has come out of rap music, but now has been a standard feature of what it is they're doing.
You mentioned one commission that you were working on, but I know that you were also on the Commission of the Black Male.
Yes.
I think headed by Ron Dellums, if I remember correctly.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe I should go back and ask you a little bit about the commission and its findings first.
Well, the commission was sponsored by Kellogg Foundation, administered by the Joint Center for Political Economic Studies, and
which is what's widely called the Black Think Tank here in Washington.
The one Black Think
That
Tank.
one, yes.
In Washington, D.C. We took a year to look seriously at the status of the black male and to come to some recommendations about what should be done, and found that there was a very heavy need to deal with early education because so much of the socialization, particularly of black males, either gets done right at an early age or done wrong, in which case if it's done wrong, young black males end up on a train into the prison system.
But and you know the figure better than I, but a young black male is 8 times more likely to be in jail than a white male.
That's
8
right.
times
That's
more
right.
likely.
That's right. And today, as we speak, roughly half of everyone who is locked up in America today is African American, and most of those are African American males. And as you look around at colleges and universities, you see a tremendous absence of African American males. If you look at the labor force,
when you say that, I have to say for our audience, when you say that, it's African American males, not that there are enough African American females, but in fact the ratio is, in the admitting class it's 57-43, and in graduation it's something like 67% of all black college graduates last year were females.
That's right. That's right.
And this creates a tremendous imbalance in what the economists call the marriage market.
Absolutely. And the sociologists too. William Julius Wilson, for example, has used this in looking at the marriageability aspect of it with respect to poor black females, and one of the reasons why they don't marry. But when you look at this, it's extremely troubling because there's an absence here in the labor force. New York City, half of all black males are unemployed, and you can look at places like Milwaukee and other cities where the same thing obtains. So we're concerned about it. The National Urban League had devoted the State of Black America to it. The president has even made some signs about looking at funds to help the transition from prison into the community.
Because
so
so
it is a
many of
huge
these
problem.
men, because so many of these men have been in prison.
That's right.
There's a technical. This is such a large problem. There's now even a name for it, which is called prisoner reentry. Many churches have become involved, many community groups, and the effort is to take these. Well, they all look young to me, but some of them aren't that young, and refit them, right?
Absolutely. The churches have been taking the main lead on this, and really, the black church is outstanding in this respect. Particularly a lot of our so-called mega churches, they get a bad rap sometimes, but some of them have some really very important outreach programs. And I say to some of my friends who, especially those who talk about things like, African Americans ought to exercise more personal responsibility and so forth, that they've never been in a black church, especially a black Baptist or working class church, because those messages have been there since day one, and they continue. And they are part of the whole cultural reason why African Americans with few resources have done as well as they've done. That's because the black church, the black community, is the most churched community in America. And if we hadn't had those messages on a consistent basis, many of us would not have done what we have done.
This is going to come up in not just general politics, but there are two big political or policy processes taking place. The first is the enfranchisement, I got that right? Or the unde-enfranchisement of felons. About 600,000 African Americans will be released from prison in the next few years. And in most states, until recently, they were prohibited from voting for the rest of their lives. That's changing, right?
It is changing. It affects maybe 4 million Americans, 40% of them African American. And it's widely believed, for example, that if places like Florida, felons had been allowed to vote, that obviously Al Gore would have won that election. And
again.
I think, again, that's right. And I think you've got some progress made in places like the state of Maryland, where a law has been passed, and I was pleased to have been one of those to testify in support of the loosening of that relationship and the enfranchisement of felons. And so today we have a better law in the state of Maryland, but that is rippling all across the country.
It has tremendous, I think, social significance to say, in effect, these men have paid their debt to society, to use the old phrase,
That's right.
and to welcome them back.
That's right. And it could have tremendous political significance because most of them tend to vote for the Democratic candidates.
Yes. The other policy development is to try to deal with their criminal record when it comes to hiring. And I think you've thought a great deal about the question of whether employers should be allowed to ask that question, how they should be allowed to ask it, because it surely has some impact on whether these men will be hired.
Yeah, so when you look at the fact that so many of them coming out are in a catch-22 situation, where the laws have prevented them, for example, from getting easy access to public housing, to jobs, to reconnecting with their families, and so forth and so on. It means that in many cases, we have, as a result of public policy, really built a route right back into the prison.
Yeah.
So we need to look at those laws again that prevent people who are coming out who have served their time from re-entering society and beginning to try to establish some viability. Otherwise, I think we're really shooting ourselves in the foot. But we have a tremendous problem. I think that we can resolve it, but it means that we have to do one thing. We also have to take a very different approach toward drug treatment, because when you look at the fact that 80% of African Americans, including males, who are in jail today are there as a result of petty drug offenses, it means that we have criminalized something which really shouldn't be criminalized. And I think if we can get to that place, we can do a lot, not just for African Americans, but for everyone.
Well, this is interesting. You know Glenn Lowry. He was on this show recently, and he talked about the great social injustice, the racial injustice of this tough enforcement of drug laws, which disproportionately result in the incarceration of African Americans. And he was taking this on as a major cause. What do you think the prospects, though, are of softening the drug laws?
Well, I don't know. We have to do a lot of soul searching because, and this is bipartisan as far as I'm concerned, because you're looking at the Crime Control Act of 1994, which was passed when Bill Clinton was the president. And some things like this make me a little bit hesitant to think, well, you know, Valhalla is going to occur if Democrats come back into power. So we have to do a lot of soul searching as a country, as a society about this. And we have to depoliticize this. And we have to look at it as a problem that affects not just African Americans, but young kids right now, white kids, who are having problems with meth. If we continue to take a criminalization attitude toward the use of drugs, it's going to cost us more. We have a very fine drug abuse and drug control center, Columbia University, which has looked at the economics and says that the United States really ought to begin to handle this problem because it's costing us more than if we dealt with it on the front end and the back end. So we have a long way to go. We need a new attitude toward not only drugs, but also a number of other things, because we went through a period where punishment really was the point. We need to go back to looking at rehabilitation really as the point. And I think that if we can do that, we can get to that place, then we can treat some of these things that are the causes of incarceration with the respect and the care that they need.
Yeah, but you know, one of our colleagues, Peter Reuter, has written about the trade-off in contemporary drug policy. The get tough, lock 'em up creates great harm in the black community, but it creates a tremendous deterrent effect in the white community, preventing more young white youngsters from using drugs. And the trade-off of a legalization or a semi-legalization is to greatly relieve the pressure on the black community, but to raise the drug use in the white community. So once again, we're in a racial divide here.
Absolutely. I'm not sure that I buy all of that, because so much of what happens to African Americans is a result of targeted policing. If you had the same sort of focus on the white community, as a matter of fact, if you look now at arrest records, you find that there were more whites arrested than African Americans, except that when they get to the criminal justice system, something happens. And so you have one route where African Americans end up incarcerated and another route where whites are not. I think we need to look at the criminal justice institution again and to look at its structure. I mean, when you have 6 years ago a panel of New York judges saying that we have a troubled criminal justice system that does not dispense justice fairly, then I think we really need to look at that institution again.
Before we close, so I have a proposition to put to you. In the 20th century, we had a number of women lead major nations. Margaret Thatcher, Mrs. Gandhi, other women around the world. In their governance, you would be hard put to know that they were women. Whether it was in their souls or the politics, they felt they had to govern as the men who had come before them. The first black president, whether he be Barack Obama or someone else, I'm thinking he's going to govern in the same mode.
I think you're right. I made this comment when Doug Walter was elected the governor of the state of Virginia in Richmond the night he was elected to the press. I don't think he liked what I said, but I think it turned out to be right. What I said, in effect, was he could not be the black governor of the state of Virginia, with a population of only 17% black. He could not, therefore, run a black campaign. He had to run a campaign for the citizens of that state. I take the same message, really, with respect to whoever is running for president of the United States, that if they're going to be president and they're going to win, they have to govern on behalf of all the people. So I'm not sure that ipso facto, if you have a black person or a woman in the White House, that they would govern in ways directly beneficial to those particular groups. That's one of the reasons why I think this book that I've written is so relevant. Freedom is not enough, because what I say is that in the final analysis, that whether or not any administration pays much attention to your community depends upon the excellence of your own mobilization. It depends upon the strength of your own civil society and your own message and your own ability to make the political system accountable. So I think that in that sense, we should not depend upon the Republican or the Democratic Party or any party, but I think that a lot depends upon us.
Well, in that regard, you're a defender of the minority carve-out districts for the House. Now, is that because they partially meet this issue that you're talking about?
Well, they partially meet that because they produce representation for the African American community. And I'm sensitive to the fact that those people who and many of them in the Democratic Party who say we shouldn't have these districts, we should break them up, and we should scatter the black population so that in the final analysis you produce liberals, and predominantly liberal whites, but liberals. It means that there are two things that you run against. One is that you dampen, I think, democracy because you want representation. So that in that sense, we're talking about symbolic representation. You want a parliamentary body to look like the nation. Secondly, there is a presumption that you have an African American, that person knows a little bit more about that community. So that in that sense, you have substantive representation that I think is more effective. And what I've shown is that if you take a black representative out of a state delegation, there are fewer votes for things that the African American community needs. So that I would say leave the person there, support those districts because that's where black representation comes from. Now, it doesn't matter to me so much that we've made common cause with Republicans in that respect.
It doesn't.
No.
Someone might say this is a pact with the devil.
Well, it's a pact that I think that we should continue to honor.
Well, the reason I brought this up was because of what you said about whoever might be the first black president. We might have, without the districts, assume, as the economists like to say, that without the specific minority districts, that we might have almost as many black members of Congress, Deval Patrick. I mean, there are a number of, you mentioned Governor Wild, a number of black men who carried predominantly white districts. I thought the argument you were going to make was, but they'd have a different voice because they'd be representing a larger and a different kind of constituency. I thought you would go to the point that, well, because they are representing black districts, or predominantly black districts, they have a different voice. It's not just that they're black, it's the people they represent.
Well, I think you're right about that. And I would say that, and I would support that. But it's equally true that there would be far fewer of them. When you look at the early 1970s, the increase in black elected officials was 27%. It's dropped today down to average in the last 5 or 6 years, 1%. Which means that most of the places where a black person could run for elected office have been filled by another black person. So that in order for the increase to take place, blacks have to run in largely white political jurisdictions. The prospect that they will be elected at the same rate in those political jurisdictions is not very good. So that's another reason why I think that we really ought to retain these districts, because we can expect it. Those places where blacks have represented predominantly white communities, I'm thinking of J.C. Watt, Gary Franks, both Republicans. Those districts were over 90% white, both of them. They had a different voice, it's true. But it is also true that Gary Franks left very early when the sentiment turned against him, just slightly. You're talking about stability. You're talking about the ability to continue to have a trust in that representative.
But before we leave this topic, many of those districts are now predominantly Latino, or at least so much so that after the senior person from those districts retires, those could be Latino districts. Would you change your mind if the effect, because it's not just that there are more Latinos in our population, it's also that African Americans are more dispersed, so that it will be quite difficult to put back minority districts?
Well, that's true. But what is happening is that Latinos and African Americans now make up a majority of many of these districts.
Yeah.
If you look at California. And so the challenge really there is in a coalition type politics from the African American perspective. Very recently, we've had the death of Juanita Miller McDonald, who represents the 37th district in California. That's a Compton in the middle of what used to be the hub of the black community. prospect is that will change and that person will be Hispanic. But in terms of the socioeconomic condition of that area, that it will remain roughly the same, so that there will still be a basis for that kind of coalition politics. If you take this to another level, what I suggest in my book, Freedom is Not Enough, if you look at those states where Hispanics and African Americans are 25 to 30% of the population, it turns out that there are 13 such states and that they represent 43% of the electoral votes. It means that the future of this country really is going to be increasingly determined at the political level, at the state level, by this kind of a coalition, and to some extent at the national level, who's president. So that there's lots of stake in African Americans and Hispanics that share the same socioeconomic conditions getting together politically.
Well, and Karl Rove knew this, which is why he tried so hard to get the Hispanic vote and did not succeed. On that note, Ron Walters, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Good luck.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content.
The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland.